Welcome to your UN House and to the 11th session of Bhutan Dialogues. Our topic today is, why does civil society matter in Bhutan? In Bhutan, the role of civil society is increasingly being recognized. Civil society in Bhutan has been doing excellent work in helping the people of Bhutan. Their Majesty's vision of a compassionate and just society has been made possible because of the hard work and dedication put in by all the civil society organizations in the country. The importance of the role that civil societies play in implementing government activities has been given a legal basis of functioning with the CSO Act of Bhutan. Today there are a total of 50 recognized CSOs, of which 40 are public benefit organizations and 10 are mutual benefit organizations. In 2016, His Majesty the King awarded the National Order of Merit to 23 CSOs. The role and effectiveness of civil society will be increasingly important also as a bridge between vulnerable groups and the government. Leaving no one behind is a key element in planning work for this country. This is an additional reason we at the UN believe capacity development of CSOs is very important for the country and a most critical action for the UN and the Royal Government of Bhutan as we assist the country on the last mile to LDC graduation. Strengthening CSO resource mobilization capacity, supporting networks and partnering among Bhutanese CSOs is a priority. Our next training workshop at the UN on strengthening CSOs will happen in November, and any CSO interested in strengthening their resource mobilization ability, please reach out to me during the break. In terms of the speakers, our guest speaker today is Suk Syon Pek Dorji. She believes that as a small landlocked country in a global world, Bhutan's identity lies in its ability to share its own stories. She has been telling Bhutan stories through news and magazine articles and documentaries to record the country's rich culture, identity, and its journey to modernity. Pek is the founder and director of the Bhutan Center for Media and Democracy and supports training for creative non-fiction writing, micro-documentaries, and multimedia storytelling in Bhutan. She is a co-director of the Mountain Echoes Literary Festival and also a firm believer in the inherent need to grow civil society for Bhutan's long-term sustainability and sovereignty. I wish to draw special attention to the work she does with the editorial board of the Druk Journal. And for those who are particularly interested in the work she has done in this area of civil society, I would wish to draw your attention to her article titled Nurturing Civil Society, Building Legitimacy, Ensuring Relevance. Our host, Dr. Karma Funso. Some colleagues were recently asking me, Dr. Karma is so wise, but where is the actionable knowledge in all the wisdom? And I was, of course, an advocate for Dr. Karma, so I said, yes, it's there, but let me draw it out. So I want to draw people's attention to his recent article on Ne sites. Bhutan, and I quote, is full of places known as Nes. Such places are considered to be powerful in giving rise to positive thoughts and actions. He, of course, refers to the Jumalari Snow Mountain, Singizong, Taksong, Mabartso, and then a little bit of a surprise, the cave of Wangdi Ne. He goes on to say, these places around the landscape of this great country help practitioners, interestingly, reinforce the practices to overcome inner fear, attachment, and unease. He goes on to say that by doing so, they also have made those previous practitioners of these Ne sites. By doing so, they also have made their prayers and injected more spiritual power to these places. They would have prayed that to whoever comes after them to these places also get the same kind of spiritual experience, happiness and bliss as they have obtained. I guess this is another reason to convince those of you who do trekking to go to some of these great Ne sites around this great country. After tea and momos, we are very fortunate to have Dechen Rabgyo, who's in the audience today, and he will be speaking about how to make career choices. This is a standard add-on section to Bhutan Dialogues as it enhances the skills that are required for everyday living. That will be after the tea, coffee and momos to which you were all invited. And with that, I wish to hand over to Dr. Karma and Ompek.
So Beck, welcome to Bhutan Dialogues.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure for us to have you here. We hope to create, through Bhutan Dialogues, a civic space, a forum through which we can refine our understanding of human progress and development, to sort of practice mindful listening and right speech, and through that also sort of enhance our courage to push boundaries of thinking further, to ask bold questions about critical issues that the Bhutanese society is confronted with. And I would, for today's session, also specifically point out that we aim to develop and enhance the capacity of the citizenry to help citizens become more powerful, more knowledgeable, educated, understanding of the developments here. You have been working here as head of Bhutan Center for Media and Democracy for many years. You are the founder. You have also worked before that on several publications on Bhutan, but you come from Singapore. So we always ask the speakers to tell us a little bit about yourself so that the audience knows who they are listening to. Can you briefly tell us how you came to be who you are right now? What brought you to Bhutan and to be the founder of BCMD?
Thank you, Dr. Karma and I are friends, and in fact I want to begin by saying that he is also on the editorial board of the Truth Journal. So it's kind of rather strange that I have a friend here asking me very incisive, deep questions about myself. But to begin with, I think I've been in Bhutan quite a while now. I actually first came here as a UN volunteer. I don't know if you know that. I came here to work at the then, at that time it was BBS by then, as it was trying to strengthen its newsroom. But yes, I grew up in Singapore, and when I was young, I always heard my father and family, parents, talk about Singapore and its survival as a small country in a very large neighborhood. It's like, is it viable? What's happening? So it was kind of interesting that I left Singapore and came to an even smaller country, landlocked amongst giants, also concerned about survival. But I guess when I first came, I was really taken up by the very thoughtful and very compassionate aspiration of GNH. I know that people here nowadays, they say, oh, GNH, right? It's the same thing. Oh, it's just another something so esoteric and cerebral, it's not actionable. But I think I believe in GNH. And when I heard this whole ideal of a country that is dedicated to the well-being of people, I thought, hey, there's something here, So I do believe that our environment and our immediate state makes us who we are. So, looking at GNH as an ideal, a monarch who really wanted to make a difference, putting people at the center of development. Then, of course, jumping into media, which gave me an insight into, what people in Bhutan were aspiring for. It's really interesting. I remember the days when the first phone line was going to Lunsi or something, and a story came in, and the person said, the first story that came from Lunsi, way out east, was something like, people in Lunsi met the first Japanese, coming to the district. And at that time, being a really young reporter, I was like, that's not really a story, is it? Isn't it the story about the telephone coming to Lunsi? I mean, it was really delightful. I mean, the kind of stories that we used to have, it's like a tiny little school that opened in a community of, maybe 15 households. 15 children were enrolled. Then they said 30 parents turned up, and you can just visualize how proud the parents were of having built the school and have the children go there. So I guess that's how it started. And then when the other great story was when His Majesty the King decided to gift democracy to Bhutan and to hand over the reins of power to His Majesty. At that time, my family and I went on sabbatical, and we were just thinking, wow, that's such a powerful change. What can we do to engage? So that was how, I guess, it's accidental. I kind of wandered into civil society. We thought maybe media and democracy is what we need, citizen education, so that's how it all started.
So it is Bhutan's transition into democracy that triggered you to set up BCMD and focus work on media and democracy. Is that how we should?
Yeah, in a way we were thinking. I mean, on this whole thing about knowledge and action. I mean, at that time we were on sabbatical. We had an opportunity to read, to think, to discuss, and do a lot of things. When that historic moment came, we were thinking to ourselves, I was saying, what can we do? And I've spent many years as a reporter in Bhutan. And I thought, and I was also involved in a few studies on the impact of media on society. And I thought, hey, we're not really prepared. At that time, we had just opened up to television and the internet. And I said, we don't even know how to judge what is, verified information. This is way before fake news, right? And so we're not prepared. We're so easily homogenized by global stories. And so I thought, maybe this is what we need to do. And we were, thinking through. And I guess you could say that.
Yeah, so of the two things that came new to Bhutan, democracy and media, which has turned out to be more difficult, more challenging for you to work on?
Oh, I think both require the same amount of energy and attention, but to the extent that now we're moving, in the early days we did a lot of work on journalism. We were preparing reporters to do more investigative reporting. We had a lot of dialogues where we brought on board editors and, writers to come once a year in a safe space like this to really share, what's our aspiration? What do we hope to do? Why are we even in media? What is our intent? I think there was a very good question once where we were saying, what is our motivation? Is it just to fill the airwaves and sell the papers, or is it actually to report on something that will make people think about who they are and what they are about? But increasingly, we also realize that perhaps the only way to make long-term change is to reach a generation of people who, for most of us, we're living in this evolving democracy, but we need to think about it more. Exactly, it's just like, the reason for this conversation, to create that space so that citizens can come together and sort of explore, question, disagree if we have to, but to figure out why are we here, what are our issues, what are we going to do about it. So increasingly we're doing more and more work in terms of citizen education. So this is where we're moving into. Yeah.
So in 2010, when you started BCMD, I remember it was BCMD's team and the Lothian team who got registered first as CSOs. But this formalized modern concept of civil society is quite new to Bhutan. And we have a very strong cultural practice in the villages of how people organize themselves and make the society work smoothly. But the modern idea is quite new to us. How should the Bhutanese understand civil society? Can you give a very quick description of what a civil society should be?
You know, we have civil society, or maybe we had in some of our more traditional villages, where people came together, associated, and helped each other out in terms of building irrigation, looking after local monasteries, etc. It's just that with rapid urbanization, it's changed quite a lot. Civil society is that space outside of the government, and outside of business, where people come together. We might have common interests, or we associate along those lines. And I think we see more of it emerging. A couple of weeks ago, I think it's called the Youth, or the Young Caring Society. It's a group of youth who came together and decided to do a little event at the park. We also see young people come together to fill potholes, and that is civil society. Okay, but the definition, very often is called the third sector. We've done a lot of work, is the sector outside of government and business. But this is the sector that people in Bhutan don't really know, because our government is strong, and that's good. We've always had a strong government. It's been the main driver of change. Business is emerging, but suddenly you talk about civil society and people say, what's that? Is that a charity? Is that, who are they? What are they? But I think that space in the villages, we had them. In urban towns, we need more of them, and it's just emerging.
But isn't this concept of civil society as a third sector proving counterproductive for us, in that when we argue for civil society somewhere outside the government and the private sector, we are eliminating a huge percentage of the population. So as a result, for instance, when we look for trustees, if we think of ourselves as being independent from the government as well as the private sector, there are not many people left to be engaged in civil society. So shouldn't we actually see civil society as a people's citizens initiative, whether these people be part of the government or be part of the private sector?
Yes, but in a small country, but it's important to know that civil society is not government. Civil society is not a bureaucracy, and we are not the state. We have we don't have the kind of authority or the finances of government. So we operate very differently. It could even be a part-time, a one-time event. We come together, we do a fundraising event, we give money to something really important, saving animals, you name it. And then we've exercised our citizen responsibility, right? We flexed our muscles a bit, civic muscles, I call them. And that space is outside of government. Because what you're trying to say is that in a small country, we need to have people from government as well. And why not? I may be a civil servant, but I care deeply about growing dahlias in my garden, or feeding dogs, or going vegetarian on Mondays. Why can't I, after hours, right, work with an organization that promotes that? Because then that gives me this real full feeling of being a genuine person. I'm not a civil servant 24 hours a day. I work and I do my duties, but after hours, I have my passion, I have my beliefs. So, I think it's different, but I think it's important to know that civil society emerges naturally in all societies. I think in most societies that are open, people will care about their streets, they will care about their dogs or their children, or domestic violence. It's a very instinctive, natural thing. So there's no way of squashing it. It's just the most important thing is how do you permit that to emerge and to grow?
Yeah,
I don't know whether I'm answering it correctly.
You
but
are.
I feel,
You are to an extent. So what I'm trying to point out is, as a full citizen, you need to have also your civic vocation, so to say, your interests and your passion to help the society. And even as a government employee or a business owner, you ought to have that, right, as a member of the society. So when we look at the current scenario of where if you are a government employee, a civil servant, you cannot even serve on the board of a civil society organization. That sort of artificially separates people into 2 or 3 categories. It doesn't help us function as
maybe
civic people.
a slight correction there, because the civil society rules are being changed a bit. I'm not sure if, I don't think it says that all civil servants are not permitted. I think it's only certain categories or certain levels, and if there's no conflict of interest.
Okay.
And very often we've asked people who work in government, we say, please ask your organization. If there's no conflict and you're permitted to, why don't you join us?
Well, that's good to know. Now, another issue, taking civil society forward, have we not looked at the existing Bhutanese models of civil society organizations in an informal way, in unwritten forms that existed in the villages for many centuries, but instead gone sort of fully for a totally foreign system? And are we facing difficulties as a result of this cultural conflict? Should we have done more to adapt our own system, perhaps synergize the two?
Yeah, I guess that's one of the challenges of being a small country, living in a world that's changing so quickly. We want to be like the rest of the world. We want to be recognized as an independent nation with, quality institutions that, follow global standards. So as a result of that, it's a great pity, but we're throwing away a lot of really good practices, that many countries now realize. I mean, traditional practices. And if you think about it, I think before governments even emerged, I think every country was, run through these principles of civic engagement, self-help, civil society. And then, of course, then you start electing a government, and they come in and they take over a lot of the tasks and duties that citizens used to take for themselves. Then we start coming up with acts and rules, and then we come up with the bureaucracy. And in some ways, it takes away the ability of average people to fend for themselves and to take responsibility for themselves. So I think this sense of reliance on the government. So in a matter of a very short span, we've also in Bhutan come to become very reliant on our government. They've done the government has done an amazing job. But perhaps one little, one area where we have to rethink is our tendency to completely rely on the government, to provide for all our needs. And so, instead of, appreciating or engaging, we are relegated to the role sometimes of just criticizing and blaming. And I'll give you an interesting, anecdote. Is like many years ago, I know there are a lot of young people here. They're doing a great job in civil society. But when your aunties were young too, not so long ago, my friends and I thought, the town is looking a bit shabby. There's not enough flowers and green. So we decided every Saturday we were greening the roundabouts. And people are looking at us, what are you doing? And that was when, at that time we were young, we said, we're going to stop complaining and blaming. Let's go and do something about it. We're tired of just, because we don't know who's going to listen to us. So we started that. Of course, it petered out after a while. It was difficult to volunteer because people in the system didn't know how to work with volunteers. They're like, there's this bunch of women, they're every week they're pushing us to give them this and help, it was, but I think this is what I mean by the, traditional self-help. People want to make a difference, and with a very structured society, and that's the danger. And now we've become a civil society that's regulated. We have an act that was passed in 2007. We have rules. But this is my personal fear, is that sometimes we become we model ourselves after the bureaucracy.
Mm.
You know, then we lose our passion, then we lose our energy, then we lose our time because we spend all our time complying and writing reports and you know, then we're no longer civil society. We've become an institution, we're a bureaucracy, then we get into this international game of fundraising and you know, and that's where, you know, and we've created a kind of civil society that's modeled because we didn't know any better. I think we were just trying to prepare for democracy, and we thought, let's have the rules in place. Let's develop good civil society. Let's not have violent protests and activism. So in preparing for that kind of envisioned space without the experience, we dropped all the good practices that we had.
Yeah, that is the irony I find that today we have, in a way, this anomaly of having registered civil society organizations, about 50 of such organizations that are heavily organized, we would say, heavily systematized with all the rules and regulations in place. But perhaps an equal amount of good work is done by the rather informal community-based organizations, of which there are hundreds of them. For every village there is a community-based organization. So instead of actually having these community-based organizations gradually become and formalize into more structured organizations, we seem to have introduced a whole new organization system and replicated or duplicated rather. So the challenge in a way is how do we actually connect the modern civil society organization culture with the existent community-based civic engagements? How do we harness the power
That
of the
is,
people?
he's asking the million-dollar question that we ask in every aspect of Bhutan. How do we find the middle path? How do we enter modernity while keeping our, history and good practices intact? First of all, I'm not knocking the Act and regulations. I think that's important because we need to be accountable. We need to learn how to have best practices. So that's important. But the CBOs as well, community-based organizations, they're growing. There are quite a few of them. I do see one or two seated here. It's really nice to see them come, or they happen to be in town. But again, CBOs face the challenge of global standards. So for example, right now, there are funders and development partners who want to see civil society grow. They want to support civil society across Bhutan. But the compliance, they expect CBOs to have, a professional accountant, a finance officer, HR. They expect that as well immediately. It's not that easy because most CBOs work in a more rural area. The way we work, we do a lot on trust and right, mutual understanding. So the expectations. Again, it's like, I suppose in a way, it's like when the UN first came to Bhutan and trying to get, program officers across the country to report to us, how did you spend 1,000 new, where and do it every week. It's not that easy. But we have to find the balance. I really think the informal groups should not be deterred. That's why I feel the rules should be sort of calibrated in such a way that organizations, for example, that operate with a higher budget, will have to comply with, have more rigid compliance. Informal groups that want to come and do something, let them do it. Just keep it simple. As long as we're honest and find a way to keep track of how they fundraise, etc. So that everyone has a role and something to do. Yes. And the informal groups will one day grow into more organized groups. But without trying, we'll never know. So maybe that's a possibility. Right now we have one rule that fits everyone. You register and you're done. And immediately, once you register, you need an office, you need staff. So you spend all your time just doing infrastructure. And not about the passion and the mission and the results that you want, right? So that's maybe this calibration, according to how much we fundraise and spend in our reach might be the way. I don't know.
Then the other big question the CSOs face here, or people concerned with CSOs ask, is how do we sustain civil society organizations and civil society work? You have done a lot of work on civil society and its role in the Bhutanese community. So what would be the questions we need to ask now? What initiatives should we take now so that the civil society culture is sustainable? Does the state have to do more to help the civil society organizations, or do we have to just build the capacity of the citizens to help sustain?
We have to do all of the above. That's the challenge in Bhutan. I think, first of all, in terms of civic space, we can do so much more to make citizens feel comfortable about starting initiatives, whether they're formal, registered, or non-formal. And in a country like this, where the state drives most development activities, the state also has that responsibility to try and create that environment for citizens to feel free to express ourselves, to come together, to do something. Because when we do that, it means that we are able to take care of our own needs. And that's why, to quote His Majesty the King, His Majesty once said that a strong civil society is a fundamental pillar of democracy. We now call ourselves a democracy. We cannot be a successful, vibrant democracy if citizens just sit and wait to be instructed, to be told, or to receive benefits without us sort of giving feedback, sort of providing, telling people about our needs and our challenges. The state has a big role, and then the space citizens themselves. We need to also, find
One thing that I feel we need to really change to help civil society works be financially sustainable, and a strength that we can draw on the Bhutanese culture is really the religious charity that is very strong. Right? How can we channel the religious charity into social causes? We need to find ways.
That is our challenge. Even today, I know, all our friends in the community, if it's about, something spiritual, they readily reach into their pockets, sign the check, and it goes. But if it's about non-profit, you're like, what is non-profit? Shouldn't the government be funding you? Why are you asking us for support? But I think the time is right now. I think people are more conscious, and people are more willing, or maybe there is a larger pocket now. People, have enough, and they're willing to support, charities, education funds, fellowships. Because traditionally it will be the community that will do it, isn't it? But I think sustainability, the other thing is to tap maybe the corporates, the corporate companies that make money. Anyone who makes a profit, if they would channel some of these funds into non-profit to support a good cause, they should be given tax-exempt status, etc. Right now, a group of friends and I, we are part of this committee that represents civil society interests. It's called the Core Committee, and we've put together a proposal. We've come up to Jerry, both the UN and other development partners, expressing our interest in starting something like a kind of a development fund for civil society, so that if we can get the state to match, we said if we fundraise so much, maybe the government would want to match it, so that young, new, informal groups, maybe we could get grants, small grants, and they would be Bhutanese grants. Because if we do not care about our own needs, we cannot forever be reaching out to the world outside, because we know that the world is also in a difficult stage, state with the kind of economy, and the issues, the economic issues that everybody's grappling with. Then coupled with this challenge of us reaching middle income. Now, by 2023, most of our friends here, Jerry's nodding, will only be advising us on policy. Forget about funds for roads and you name it, many development partners. So we need to look to ourselves for the support. within the country, and it's important, a certain percentage, and our people must exercise that liberty to be able to support, whether it's reduction of domestic violence, reduction of supporting rehab centers. We have a lot of rehab centers. So we came up with a few ideas like, could we not ask for a percentage of the tax on sale of alcohol to go to non-profits that deal with such issues? Could we not, in Thailand there's something called the sin tax on cigarettes and alcohol that go, a certain percentage is channeled back to non-profit. I think we can figure out a more innovative way. We know that we have a lot of trust funds that support environment here. I wonder how we can do it so that these trust funds look beyond just the green sector, but look into everything else and support capacity of nonprofits to take care of and to encourage partnership between nonprofits, CSOs, and the government. So don't just fund government activities alone, but fund a model where you can say, okay, there's so much that comes to government, but please work with nonprofits in delivering these services.
Yeah, I think the Bhutanese society has reached a point where they can contribute towards funding social work, at least diverting their spiritual donations towards a social cause. And in this respect, I personally think the spiritual leaders have a major role to play. And our current Jekempo is showing a really wonderful example. He would give these 3-month, 4-month-long ceremonies or sermons, and then donate the income from those sermons towards health, towards education.
Yes.
And that's the ideal case of a spiritual person trying to change the culture here in a positive way. But coming back to your take on how, say, the alcohol factories should contribute a certain percentage towards projects to solve problems caused by alcohol, I'm not sure if that would be, in the long run, a very healthy practice, because perhaps then the alcohol and tobacco companies will justify even producing more and irresponsibly distributing and selling the products, because they will say we have contributed such a percentage towards a good cause. So it's a bit like a kind of a redemptive charity that people do in religious practices. Like they would normally live their lives doing everything opposite to the religious principles they're supposed to follow, and then if you spend a few million or a few days in a month doing the rituals to sort of purify themselves of the negative actions. And it would be a bit like that we don't promote the good practices. Instead, we allow the bad practices to go on as long as they contribute financially. Do you think that's healthy?
But I think we can create it in such a way so it's not just done in isolation. It can be done, but there needs to be more engagement. It can be done either through the government, so they don't give directly, but the other way is for them to actually engage with the rehab centers, so they actually see what's happening. So we have better control systems. So we ensure that alcohol is not sold to people who are underaged. It's not so freely available in every grocery shop, in every neighborhood, in every apartment block. So I think when we talk about sustainability, I was thinking of that as a means for financial sustainability. But obviously, my friends in nonprofit and working in the other areas, we keep telling them, you need to do more, advocacy. We have to ultimately, civil society's role is also to change policy. We can't operate in isolation and just, get funds. I have a very good friend, he works in a kidney foundation. I used to tease him. I said, if all you do is just go and do more dialysis, you're like putting a plaster every time we have a little, we fall and hurt our knee. But what are we doing to change our habits so that, we live healthier lives, so that, we don't have kidney disease. We need, and then we also need to lobby with policy so that the conditions are also changed. It's not just a one-off,
So even talking about the financial sustainability, shouldn't the CSOs and members of CSOs come together perhaps to lobby the government, whichever government comes in the next term, to at least raise the tax exemption slab? Right now, even if you are giving to a charity, 50,000 is the limit. Now, if you're trying to really develop caring, compassionate Buddhist society, philanthropy and giving should be allowed limitlessly, as long as there are no strings tied to it. So maybe one area where we can really have actionable wisdom is to lobby the government and say, why don't you raise this? And perhaps even give more incentives for people to give to CSOs.
We are actually trying to do that in the core committee. The chair of the core committee and the chair of the CSO authority have been trying to meet up with the government. And we also have plans. We meet, the core committee meets quite regularly, and all the civil society organizations in Bhutan meet 4 times a year. We network and we discuss these issues. It's on the agenda. We realized at least in this year's retreat in Phunsaling, when we came together, we realized that we have to do a lot more work to reach out to government. And that is on the agenda. We realized that we must lobby more. But we are the small players. There are only like 48 active organizations, of which 10 are mutual benefit, right? And 30 are public benefit organizations. So it's one step at a time. We were invited last year by Parliament to meet with them, and we thought it went really well, and we are hoping to have the opportunity this time for us to be more proactive. Now is our time, in our turn, to reach out and say, could we meet with you? Can we discuss some issues, and our needs? So it is on the cards, but it's coming slowly, so that people are not taken aback. By we don't want to push too hard, so that it could be misunderstood, right?
But now, one of the things we can do, perhaps without having to be reserved and not pushing too hard, is really promoting civil society culture among the population, particularly young people. We have quite a lot of young people in the audience. What can the civil society organizations do to nurture the spirit of civil society among the youth? What are some practical things that the young people can take up to be part of civil society? You have worked in BCMD, or you are leading BCMD and doing such works. Do you have some practical things that they can take up?
There are a lot of things that can be done. I think civil society is a great opportunity, and it's also a place where many of us, young and the older ones, can find a purpose, Very often you go to work because it's work and you need to make a living. That's important. But you could look at civil society as a place where not only do you work, but you work in something you care about, and you see the results. It's very nourishing for the individual, and growth. And I see, and again, it's not just about youth, it's also, we're living healthier lives. A lot of people are retiring, moving in the next system, and they're really still healthy at 58, 60, I don't know what's the... And there's so much that can be done. But most people at 60, of course, those who are spiritual will prepare for the next life, very important. But at the same time, you can still really engage. You still have, Bhutanese are living longer lives. We can do a lot there. And I feel that interning is one, volunteering is one, fundraising is one, sitting on boards, sitting on committees. If young people really believe in something, just get together with your friends. And I've seen that happen. I've got colleagues, young colleagues at work who spend their weekends, or did spend their weekends early this year, filling potholes every Saturday and Sunday. It's not enough that they work in a non-profit, but they'll go because, they find the camaraderie, the friendship, like doing something. And then another young friend has told me, she said there are a lot of young Bhutanese who really want to volunteer, but they don't know where to go. They have so much energy, they have so much time. So I think, there's something for everyone out there. If a non-profit is not offering that, you can go and start it yourself. Then go and reach out to a non-profit and say, can I work under your umbrella? Can I help you do this? We have found in some of the work we do with the youth, in something called the Youth Initiative, and also in something we called Building Community in townships, where we train young people to map their neighborhoods and to come up with, ideas on the needs of the neighborhood, what issues they're facing, and then with very little, they take a little local action. That young people really, I think that's the tipping point. So I just read, my colleague just came back from Paro, where he met students from a school, and the student was telling him that how nervous he felt having to go to the community to talk to people and to ask them questions. What is happening in your village? You know, what are your needs? What can I do about it? But he said after he did it, he felt so, he was no longer nervous. He felt, you know, he didn't use the word empowered, but he said he felt so confident, he felt so good, because he's never ever been sent. You know, sometimes in school we have no time to investigate the real environment around us because we spend too much time cramming with information. But I think what this young person, you know, has discovered is real life wisdom, talking to people, and he was very excited. And this is just this week. So I feel there are a lot of opportunities, and we were discussing this. If young people would get involved today, you know, work for a non-profit. It's quite different. I know that many people still prefer to go to the civil service, and that's laudable, because I think not many countries have a strong government, and we must have a strong government. But I do believe that we also need the best and brightest in non-profit, because this is where the next level of change is going to take place. And you know, in the UN, everyone keeps talking about sustainability into the long term, the SDGs, you know, etc. The SDGs will only be achieved, I believe, if civil society is involved, because governments on our own, you know, on their own, are limited. There's only so much we can do. Change today is about reaching the last mile, the most difficult and the most challenging, a lot of new emerging issues. And strong state machineries are large, quite difficult. I think it really requires nimbleness, creativity, innovation, you know, small groups and people who are close to that community, who really understand and care about the community, who can make that change. So I think there's no question about it. I think the sooner we recognize the fact that civil society is intrinsic to our long-term sustainability, intrinsic to Bhutan's survival as a sovereign country, the better it is. It's just that we don't know, and we keep questioning, and we live in, you know, we sometimes are a bit fearful because we live in a large neighborhood called South Asia, you know, teeming masses, a lot of, you know, challenges in non-profit. So we worry and we say, oh, you know, Bhutan's going to be like this. But I feel that we should look at, you know, the possibilities, the opportunities, and where it has worked. I like your idea of, you know, going back to traditional practices, strengthening that, looking into places where civil society has worked, and build on trust and relations. Not work on fear. We're just so fearful recently about it.
This is one question I wanted to ask you. Is there a country that Bhutan can use as a reference point? Because we have been told many times that civil society culture in Bhutan shouldn't be like Nepal's or Philippines or India's. And that's the reason why the state is making it very, very constricted.
Yes.
So do you have a country that we should really use as a reference?
I was thinking about that. I don't know about any particular country, but I was thinking when I looked at all these indicators, right? Maybe some of the Scandinavian countries. You know, obviously, I think even in India, we can't say that all of India is not, you know. We visited a place in Gujarat where the Gujaratis, as merchants and tradespeople, have actually committed a lot of their earnings and support strong civil society space. So we need to figure out where are the best practices. But I'm thinking Denmark and all these other places, because if you look at all the indicators, they're small, they're socially oriented. And I've been told, we've had Danes work in Bhutan for decades, right? They supported a lot of our development activities. Many of my Danish friends say if you get 2 Danes together, you know, they would start a non-profit and a civil society movement. The average Dane volunteers on 2 to 3. They're members of 2 to 3 agencies. So when I heard that, I said, wow, you know. But in the same way, so are Bhutanese, right? We have our local Tokpa, then our mother's whatever, and my father's village. In some ways, we're very similar.
Yes.
But I think what holds them apart from us is this high level of trust. And that trust in Bhutan is eroding because we're rapidly urbanizing. We have all left, you've left, you know, from your village. We're living in new towns. We have to rebuild that community, you know, so that there's some trust that, okay, CSOs, we trust them, you know, non-profit businesses, you know, we trust them. How do we provide opportunity rather than too many rules to control? Because in doing that, although the intention is good, it actually prevents, you know, people from emerging, you know, to fill up that space.
My final question for you before we open it up to the audience is, you talked about best practices. What is your best practice to keep yourself nimble and alert, sharp, effective? What do you do as a habit or a practice regularly to remain effective? We want something
I don't
practical
know if
that
I'm
you can
nimble
share.
or sharp or alert. Most of the time I drink a lot of tea.
Well,
I
that's-
try desperately to walk, but that's dwindled down to once a week. I used to try and do a lot of yoga, but my friends who started yoga with me are now trainers, and I'm still trying. Well, I guess the thing that keeps me going is I'm working in an area that I enjoy, so maybe that's the only thing that, you know, that's the impetus that keeps me going. But I do believe in good health and some sitting to calm the mind, because otherwise we'll all get a bit overwhelmed.
You're a practitioner. No?
No,
You want to say that?
I'm struggling. I'm a real struggler.
Thank you. Well, that's what
Thank
a
you.
good practitioner would say. Now, I'll open it to the audience. Yes, Hari.
Couple of questions. That was really interesting. So, two quick questions. One, what do you think are the biggest achievements of civil society organizations in the last 10 years of democracy? And secondly, what is the ecology of the corporate social responsibility scene like here?
Biggest achievements, I suppose, the fact that civil society groups are growing. You know, when we first started, I think we were first registered in 2010 in March. We were the first two. So in 8 years, we now have nearly 50. And the fact that not many have died down, we're still persisting. We are struggling, but we are still there. We're surviving. We haven't given up. And you see that the civil society space, which started a lot with maybe with livelihoods and charity or environment, these were the strong groups, is now growing into more dynamic areas. It's not just fellowships and education, but it addresses some difficult areas, domestic violence, rehab services. These are difficult areas. Governance, transparency, accountability issues. So the fact is, I think that that more agencies are coming, filling in a lot of these needs. It shows that we are trying. So that might be, and then also, of course, the fact that His Majesty recognized the work of civil society by endorsing it, and saying that it's important. That has been an impetus. And the other one, the ecology of CSR.
Yeah.
I'm trying not to be negative, but CSR in Bhutan tends to support a lot of matches, archery and soccer and all that. I wish they would, sort of be a little more inclusive and support more activities.
That's not
See-
bad, right? Because sports is good for health.
No, that's good. No. But CSR is just growing. It's just starting. It's only the corporate sectors that might have a little policy. But private businesses, most don't. And that is, again, in Bhutan's context, they would give to people they know or their own community or to the monastery.
To introduce myself, I am from Hunsila.
Not the one to meet the first Japanese.
Probably. Okay, coming to the point, my concerns have been partially addressed, but it's still not convinced. You started the dialogue with the survival of Singapore and Bhutan. So my question is again coming back to the sustainability of the CSO, particularly the registered CSO. A registered CSO may be sustainable financially, but what if there is no role for that particular CSO to play? And also you have mentioned that we have strong government, and with democracy, I'm sure that you could have seen the pledges made by the political parties. Many of the roles that civil society organizations can play are now being sort of encroach to by the government. So with such challenges in mind, what should the existing CSOs be doing to ensure that they continue to stay and play a very important role? And with what mindsets or with what sort of considerations should the new CSOs aspiring to register consider if they are trying to register as a CSO, given all those challenges?
Are you from a CSO, or you're thinking of?
Thinking of.
Okay. We have a lot of aspiring.
Yes, indeed.
I don't know what to say except you know, if you don't have a very strong mission and you really don't have the passion and you think it's just a job where you can get some funding, I don't think, you know, it would last very long. That's the difficult part, because you know, then it becomes another job. I don't know, what does Karma have to say about that? But I feel that in terms of like government encroaching, I don't know. I think government has a very reflex action of, you know, embracing everything and trying to provide for everyone. But in the 12 5-year plan, if 50% of the budget is to go to the districts, you know, we know that the government will be compelled to think about opportunities to engage with the people there, because otherwise it's not sustainable. We're just going to quickly spend that neutrum that we have just to show results at the end of 5 years. We've done this. So what will we do? We'll just build infrastructure. But infrastructure on its own is not going to make the difference. It's got to be a change in mindset. So to do that, they really have to reach out to the people there. Right?
Well, my take on sustainability, if I were to talk about Lothian, for instance, I always believe that Lothian should just exist as long as Bhutan needs it, and no further. So if there is a need or a gap to fill, then it should exist, and we should do what we can, especially within our own capacity, to sustain it. But when a day comes that Lothian's mission is no longer needed in Bhutan, what's the point of holding on to it? And given the fast changes going on, the dynamism of the whole development system, we need to also remain very dynamic. So the focus of Lothian, which was initially child sponsorship in the late 1990s, have moved to early learning and preschools at the beginning of the century, and then further to entrepreneurship by 2007 and 8. So it's really looking at the needs, the problems in society. And I think when a young person thinks about being engaged in civil society, this is one approach I would sort of recommend. The Buddha's approach. Life is full of problems. No? Samsara is full of suffering, he says. In a modern idiom, that means life is full of problems. So it's important to identify that problem and then see if there is a solution that one can really achieve, bring about. If there's no problem, why work on the solution? So our approach, my approach is really that we should identify the problem that not many others are working on, and even if there's some working on it, I think there's always enough room for good work.
Yes,
we shouldn't ever see it as duplication or replication. It's actually good to have more people doing good work. So I think for people who are thinking about civic engagement, they should really look around for problems in society. And there are so many problems which we have not even thought about, let alone solve. And then take a sort of initiative, a joint initiative to solve that problem.
I'd like to pick up from your point about duplication. We are constantly warned, we are told, oh, Bhutan is a small country. How can, everyone's duplicating one another. But, on the one hand, I understand that maybe support is limited, but as Karma says, if there is a need, it can be served. It can be served by one large organization, or it can be served by many small organizations. And I feel that if the function of civil society is also to contribute to independence, democratization, then duplication can't be helped. We need as many people as possible to experiment and try. Even if we fail, we mature with it. We don't want to protect everyone so much that you'll be perfect, let's all do, And sometimes, obviously, we need to collaborate a whole lot more, government, non-profit to non-profit. We can do a lot. And this is where we're starting. But I feel that part of the test of civil society is just to let people try it out. And as long as we, some of us could be working in a different region or with a different age group, that's also part of it. It's not a very clean or clear-cut, very professional space. Civil society is a bit messy and dynamic, and that's the way it has to be. And I feel that the other point is, today's problems are pretty large. We are also part of the global world now. So the problem is that when we think as a country, as a nation, we are only thinking of serving a particular group of people. But if you look at issues for the environmentalists, like climate change and everything, it's much bigger. Countries impact one another. So we need to think out of that space. I'm Bhutanese and I care about what's happening in my village, but my action also, has an impact globally. Certain things are global issues. So that's the challenge. And that's why it's important that civil society be allowed to grow and be tested and be pushed a bit. Then it'll come. And we don't survive forever. I agree with Karma. When we said the same thing many years ago, one of our funders looked at us and had a good laugh. He said, "Are you sure?" But we have changed sometimes. In the beginning, we focused a lot on journalism and journalists. Then we found that some groups have come up and are doing, that kind of training. So we moved away. So now we're doing more citizen education. We're doing community development, right, with municipal authorities to model democratic approaches to making change. So I think there's always room. I think you just have to be a little more innovative and creative and not look to government as competitors. But we do, to use Karma's word, we have to lobby with them a little more to say, to get them to trust us. We have to build relations. I think that's the important part.
Yes, Dorji.
My question is on CSO. Basically, it's quite clear that one of the challenges is the financial aspect, because ultimately the donors, the grants, they phase out, and then it's a question of sustainability. So from that perspective, I'm thinking how about a move towards social enterprise model, because it's ultimately the sustainability which is going to deliver benefit and make impact at the poorest or vulnerable section of society. And you yourself have also, I'm glad that you have taken out the example of the Gujaratis, the business people there doing their bit. So from that perspective, I would like to hear some of your opinion in that aspect, especially in terms of sustainability and the impact that would have if we make a move towards social enterprise models. Thank you.
I think social enterprise is at the heart of, long-term sustainability of CSOs. I think more and more CSOs are thinking that way. Some of them are doing businesses, some of them are, running shops. I think in the early days, people questioned, why does this organization have a shop? I said, they have a shop because they're trying to sell the goods of the people they serve, and the money is plowed back to the organization. But social enterprise is a model, and it's an important model. But in terms of sustainability, I really feel, in the same room a few years ago, we had a discussion in UN and CSOs, and they were saying the pie is smaller, it's shrinking. And then I said, we shouldn't think about the pie and the shrinking pie. We first have to think about what it is that we're doing, what motivates us to do what we do. And if we think, as Karma said, there is a need, we believe we can, contribute something, we can do something, the pie can always be made bigger. We have to figure it out ourselves. We have to get people to care. And our own people need to contribute. And one interesting social enterprise model I realized, and Karma will be pleased to hear this, one of these religious foundations is actually going to start a restaurant in Paro.
Which one is this?
Right in the corner of Shaba, on the way, the ruins is opening up. And I thought it was really interesting because this is going to be a dining cafe, and the money is going to be plowed back to the foundations. And I think these are the models that are emerging that we can learn from. And if all of it would contribute to promotion of local economy and our own business models, I think we should really support it.
The good news is, I think in the new CSO regulations, civil society organizations are now allowed to carry out businesses with commercial profit, as long as the profit remains within the CSO. And of course, it will remain within the CSO. No private individuals are going to take the profit. So that's a good news for us.
The one challenge is sometimes we operate in a space where the government provides. So when government does trainings and everything is provided for. At non-profits, we have to provide tea, coffee, momos, to draw the crowds, lunch. That's why we struggle. Because we're also trying to be like government. And people must now realize, that they should contribute a bit.
But in that respect, I think we need to also educate the people.
Yes.
A lot of people, when they come for trainings, they may come for the DSAs or the teas and momos, but those are not the kind of people we are really aiming to train to begin with. And then I think we can always set a difference in terms of the quality of the training. So they may not get the momos and the teas, but they will get a much better training or a much better educational package. And I think that in the long run will slowly change the culture.
Yes, and all the non-profits have to come together, to generate a more collective courage to be able to say, would you pay for your own lunch? Or buy a plate of momos? Right now, I think we all hesitate all the time. When we started, I looked to one of the bigger CSOs and I asked them, what do you think? Can we do this? They said, if you charge anything, no one's going to come. Forget it. So we ended up, to this day, my colleagues and I, sometimes we still hesitate. And then when we have no money to do anything, then we're like, what do we do, to get people to come?
Well, educate the citizens. Dishin, you have a question.
Mine is more of an opinion than a question. It is more to do with some of the civil society practices, particularly labor exchange, that is LATHA. And I'm talked about the trust and rebuilding community. By the way, I come from Drepung and it has been connected by a farm route some 6 or 7 years ago. What I see is in earlier kind of economic, how economic works at village level, a household, be it poor or rich, but in terms of what, as far as possible, if they have labor to contribute, they were very much part of the economy, village economy. But then with coming of money, so it is the money that mobilizes the labor, and as a result, so those who do not have money, while the sources of income are very limited, people had to fight, survive, give sacrifice a lot in their securing their livelihood. And I think sidelined those people who are not so innovative or not so who do not have much idea to survive. So as we transit, as democracy has come in Bhutan, so middle class is very much part and parcel of strengthening democracy. But then our somehow the way we transited, say for instance, sidelining those people who got sidelined because they do not have potential to generate enough money. So to secret service. So how do we really explore opportunities so that we can rebuild that kind of economy, not necessarily confined to currency notes or kind of thing.
Yes. For the sake of the audience, Dechin is a young man who has just finished writing a book called Youth Civic Engagement and published this year. Beck, would you like to comment on Dechin's comment?
How do we, I thought here's a comment. There's no need to comment on the comment, do you?
Well, I think this is a typical challenge we would face as we go from a traditional barter economy, subsistence farming economy, to now a totally cash and consumerist market economy. And so how do we deal with the stresses, the tensions that this transition creates? Big question. We may have to deal with the specific problems, and one specific problem is about this voluntary labor. When I grew up in my village, yes, my family can build a house with voluntary labor from the rest of the village, and then when the neighbor builds his or her house, we would contribute the labor in return. Now that has died totally in my village because the cash economy has come in a big way. How to go about that is still a big question. I don't have a answer for that. But maybe we need to bring back some of the values, good values from the old system. We haven't really thought through all this carefully yet. People these days are actually now bartering cash in a way. If the first household is building, the second household may bring a contribution in cash or some other forms. And then when the second household builds, the first household returns that same value. So labor has been substituted with money. But of course, you don't necessarily have enough money to build the house as you had enough labor in the past. So yes, it's I think quite complicated, and you don't have a quick, easy answer for this. You had a question, yes?
Answer, but I couldn't attend all the program. I got late because I was in Democracy House to confirm data. I'm a bilingual reporter from Bhutan today. And my question is that to the speaker, like you told that exhibit, okay, government has a limitation and they cannot cover all the spaces. So as an analyst, as a critic, okay, how do you think in which part our government have left out, and which kind of civil society is needed to come out to run the network part like government?
Well, I was just making a statement. Okay, let's say government has its priorities. The priorities are health, education, etc. Some things are just not government priorities. Maybe stray dogs are not government priorities, but it is an issue. LGBT may not be a priority, but it's an emerging development. So these are the things where, this is why we say civil society fills sometimes a niche, and it is an opportunity for people with like-minded or, groups who come up and say, hey, we're all LGBT, we all face the same kind of concerns, let's get together and have a chat, Let's create something so that other LGBT would feel that not so left out. So that's what I mean. And also with the kind of development processes we have, so much money being pumped in. We already have nonprofits working in different areas. Some are really in the rural areas doing livelihood, poverty. They have established very good rapport with certain villages. So, if the government would channel their support through these nonprofits and work with the hubs, with the whatever, I think, work is already there. We have to be skillful, right? Especially now in today's world where you have to deliver a lot of results in a very small time frame. That's the way to work. I think that's what I mean. I hope that answered your question. Yeah. What's this guy, Ugin?
Oh.
Ugin is from the Young Caring Society. He also manages a charity, and I want to introduce in front of him a young caring citizen who's on my board, dressed in pink. So you see, we have such good young people, it's just that sometimes we don't give enough recognition to what is actually happening. We just operate on fears, like too many CSOs and they're all duplicating, but actually many good things are happening.
I'll not use a microphone to hear my voice since I don't want to lose my voice in between to hear to the people or to the concerned authorities. So I'll use my natural voice to reach to the particular person or destination.
Sorry.
With that, I got a small question, which is actually through many different informal group activities, we found that there's much more people can actually do informally, but with so much limitations, sometimes it's quite difficult with the laws or with the regulations. Our youths can't go and do something in the society. So with that, I want to ask, is there any possibility for CSOE to come up with kind of some center where the youths can come in and where they have a good internet facility, where they can make their own cup of coffee, where they can sit together, create the ideas, and take to the society to benefit our community. Basically, why I'm mentioning that, since sometimes when we really don't have a place to sit together and discuss it's a limitation again. And basically, during our vacation for the youth and during once they graduate from colleges and high school, there is some gap to fill and give their time to the society. And during that time, if they can come to that center, even though I don't have any friend in my college, I can go there and meet a different group of people where we can discuss something and make some project. And from those projects, we can learn a lot, I think. So with that, I think if the CSOA could some possibility to see kind of a center for the youth.
First again, I don't know if there's anyone here from CSOA. Is there anyone?
You
oh, wonderful. I was on it. I'm no
Yeah,
longer on the
you're no
committee.
longer on it.
But at BCMD, we have a space called the Media Lab. We collaborate with YDF. And for a long time, every Saturday is open in the afternoon. We have our youth initiative members who will come and we tell people, join it, just come, drop in. The idea was that, come and make yourself a cup of tea, sit and have a chat. We used to push that quite a bit. But recently, of late, we've also sort of stepped back a bit and we're focusing more on the trainings and the workshops. But we've been requested to keep the space open. At one stage, we kept it open. There were groups of people who came to learn how to speak, right? Wasn't there? I cannot remember. Karma, do you remember? There was a Toastmasters club. Young people came every Saturday and they, trained each other. So that went on for a couple of months and then it stopped. So we should actually rejuvenate that space and that offer. It's just that lately we've been doing news literacy work on Saturdays with schools. But that's only in the morning, so we could consider that. But I feel that there are a lot of spaces. And I don't think young people should think that they're not allowed this. I think first of all, you just, if you really have a passion and an interest, you come together with your friends. You can sit anywhere. You can sit in your porch, you can sit in your own sitting room, come to BCMD's lab and think of what you'd like to do and then reach out to people. Can I do this? Can I do that? The tricky part is when you want to fundraise. Then you have to be accountable. Then you have to make sure that you get the right permissions. You don't do it in public. You don't knock on people's doors because that's also an infringement of people's free time. They don't want every fundraiser to come to your front door. But there's nothing stopping you. Sometimes it's us ourselves. We think,
Self-censorship.
Huh? Yes. At one stage, though, many youth groups thought they had to be formally registered. So we tried to clarify. We said, you can be informal. Until you start fundraising, then you figure out how you do the fundraising and be accountable. But you shouldn't feel too restrained. I don't think there are too many, not too many people telling people to stop doing things, especially if it's for the greater good and it's to serve needs of society.
I will be very brief. I think you answered some of these questions, but they're about sustainability. I read a statistic the other day that a full third of the population of Bhutan is under the age of 15. I think it's
under 25 is 40-something%, 48 or 50%.
You had mentioned about the Loden Foundation as an example, fitting a niche, meeting a need. It seems that there may be new needs on the horizons, particularly given the young population. And then we had also heard that a great time to volunteer in civic society is after you retire, around the age of 60. But I wonder about harnessing the power of youth and also using that to serve their interests. So are there new projects on the horizon that would be responsive to the needs of people, 40% of the population under the age of 25? And what are the avenues to capture their interest and their motivation to move forward in a civic society that would be not only powered by youth, but also would then have great longevity because there's a long time between 25 and 60.
I hope I didn't make it sound like only retirees can volunteer. You can volunteer at any time, and what I was telling Ugin was, don't wait, don't hesitate. No one is restricting us. In fact, I see a lot of young people. I know young people volunteer in the public library, right? We have a group that Kamra and I were involved in, and now the youngsters have taken over every Saturday, reading stories to young children. there's a lot of possibility there, and it's up to young people to decide. But if we want to organize it for them, at BCMD we've tested a few what we call the local action programs. We started with the youth initiative, of which Dishin was a member. His group tried to do a little footpath from the hospital to the Chorten. We've had people promoting local economy, right? In our mapping activities, we're training teachers to train young people, and they go, when they map their neighborhoods, then they decide what needs to be done. They make a proposal, and they do it. And then we find that now we're trying to do a little more research to see the long-term results. But we often find that when young people have done it once, they want to do it again. You know, there are actually many, many opportunities, and sometimes it's not just organized civil society space that can do it. I feel like a group of parents, a university, a monastic institute, a village, they want to do it, we should do it.
Okay.
Don't look to like registered, formal, legalized organizations to do it. I think it should spring forth naturally.
Well, we're running out of time, so I have again the privilege of asking you the last question. Bhutan Dialogues offer you 2 books from the New York Times bestseller list or any other list. Which books did you choose and why? And if you didn't choose one, you can also tell us what your favorite book is that we should read.
Oh, there are many. But one that I asked for was, I didn't realize, it's called Sacred Voices of Nyingma Masters. And then Karma and Vijay, why are you choosing that? It's actually a pictorial book with stories by someone called Sandra Scales. I've heard about it for a long time. I'm just interested in it because if Karma remembers, you know, that I and my sister were involved in actually producing a short documentary looking at great masters and reincarnate masters. And at that time, our roles were reversed. We were questioning Karma about. So I'm, you know, I have a natural interest in the stories of bodhicittas, you know, bodhisattvas who come back and try and benefit the world. And the other one that I would recommend now, which I just picked up at the recent literary festival, is a poet, Sarah Kay's. It was the first time I've encountered spoken poetry. She was great. So I picked up her book. I cannot remember, something Wreckage. And, you know, it's so spontaneous. It's a bit like civil society. She just got up, she picks up very mundane things, but she brings them alive, and she really goes deep into herself to express things in very, very simple manner. But this whole thing about poetry that is different is it's performed. You know, when I grew up and read poetry, it was, I think Jerry's nodding is all like romantic poets, and you know, like, yeah, you know, it's different. We read it, we distilled it, we instilled it, we sort of, you know, generated that create the imagination. But now it's like 21st century poetry is spoken, it's performed, it's really different. I have the book. My colleagues can borrow it when I'm done, but she's in the bookstore, and I think Mountain Echoes has all the books in the public library as well for loan.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, the documentary that Beck produced, I think about 15 years ago, or 12. No?
10.
Anyway, it's called Born Again Buddhist, if you're interested in it. Born Again Buddhist.
Karma was looking much the same, I think.
I'm
No,
not quite
just
sure
kidding.
about that.
Yeah.
But, well, thank you very much anyway. And I hope the audience got a better understanding of civil society in Bhutan. I normally wrap up the session by sharing a traditional piece of wisdom. And today I'm going to share a verse from Bhadracharya Pranidhana, Sangbochu Vimelam, which Bhutanese recite almost every day, everywhere. I do it frequently. And one of the verses there is quite appropriate for civil society, actually. It goes, Dagi Chudang Sungbar Ganchuba, the Dada Tautu Tebarsho, Luda, Nani Simgichan, Chubata, Melam Chiktu Chud. May I always enjoy the company of those whose actions accord with mine. And with body, speech, and mind, may we unite in aspirations and actions. So with that, I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you, Beck, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
you.